By many measures, our society isn't doing very well, and our attitudes towards family, faith, and our nation are poor. According to a Wall Street Journal NORC survey done last year, they found that declining levels of support for organized religion, family formation, community involvement, and patriotism to be very low. You're listening to the Commonwealth Matters, and I'm your host, Richard Nelson. According to Princeton law professor Robert George, attitudes in these different areas reflect a loss of fidelity. Professor George launched Fidelity Month in 2023, and he's here to talk about his efforts to elevate the idea of fidelity as crucial to personal and societal health. Professor George, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, we so appreciate your time and what you're doing with Fidelity Month. I think a good place to start in this program is with that Wall Street Journal NORC poll done in March of last year. And they found declining levels of support, as I said, for organized religion, family formation, community involvement, and patriotism. And here are a few of the numbers. 28% of Americans believe that marriage is not that important or not that important at all. 27% believe that patriotism is not important or not that important at all. 33% said that belief in God is not that important. 40% believe that religion is not important. And 33% believe that having children is not that important. These are a few of the key areas where Americans were polled. Clearly not a good sign of our attitudes towards these important areas of life. What's going on with these attitudes? You're a little bit older than me. I'm not going to point out your age, but but you've seen a little bit more than I've seen in a lifetime. And I would guess that these numbers have radically changed, probably even in the last 10 to 15 years. Do you have an idea of what's going on with our attitudes towards these important areas of life?
Well, it's complex, but I have some ideas of what's going on. I don't think anybody understands it entirely, but I think we can get some insight into it. One of the features of the polling that you didn't call attention to is people's attitudes toward the importance of making a lot of money. That's up. So people's attitudes toward religion, toward family, toward community are down, but their belief in the importance of making a lot of money, getting ahead, have gone up. So we've got a problem here, and we've got to fix it. What kind of problem is it? Well, it's a loss of faith. It's a problem of a loss of faith. And that's what I mean by fidelity. There are some values that used to bind Americans together, despite our historic manifest differences of race and sex and ethnicity and religious affiliation. What were those values? Shared across the board. Well, faith in God. That was a value for Americans, whether they were Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Black, white, of Croatian heritage, of Ecuadorian heritage, of Nigerian heritage. Americans of all backgrounds shared faith in God, and that was a value that tended to bind us together. It enabled us to share that sentiment articulated by our founding fathers, by Thomas Jefferson himself in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Faith in God was right there as a unifying value at the very founding of the country. And it was shared for decade upon decade upon decade. And now that belief, that faith, that idea of the importance of fidelity to God has diminished, and that's a problem. What are some other values that used to bind us together? Well, the importance of family, of fidelity to spouse, of caring for children and for elderly parents. We've had a loss, we've suffered a loss of fidelity in that domain as well. And again, Democrats and Republicans, people who are Black and people who are white and people who are Asian and people who are Latino, people who are Protestant, people who are Catholic, people who are Jewish, despite these differences, Americans shared a belief in the importance of fidelity to spouse, fidelity to family. Were we always perfect as individuals in practicing the virtue of fidelity? No, we're frail, fallen, fallible human beings. We err, we sin, but we believe, nevertheless, in the importance of doing our best to be faithful to spouses and family. And what else? What were other values that bound us together, bound us together despite our differences? Well, belief in our country and its goodness, belief in the importance of patriotism. That is gratitude for our blessings of liberty and prosperity that we try our best to repay by being good citizens. That's what patriotism is really all about. And similarly, fidelity to our local communities, the belief that we have an obligation to give back to our communities, to be productive, contributing members of our local communities. Well, that has diminished too, according to all the polling. And again, what's lost there is something that used to bind us together. It's not just that Democrats were patriots, Republicans and Democrats were patriots, Protestants and Catholics, Jews, people who were not of any particular religious affiliation were nevertheless patriotic. People of all ethnicities, people of all races shared a belief in the importance of country and of community and of service to country and community. In our great military struggles, the heroic struggle against Nazism in the Second World War, just to cite one example, despite the problems we had in our country, despite racial injustice in our country, blacks and whites fought valiantly as patriots to defeat the Nazi war machine. Protestants and Catholics and Jews, people of every ethnicity. But here again, a loss of faith in our country, a loss of faith in our communities, a loss of our sense of our obligation to be good citizens, to be patriots, has undermined that unity. So it's necessary, Richard, for us to do something to bring it back, to restore the fidelity that will restore our unity. And that's what Fidelity Month is all about. So last year, based on no authority other than myself, by the power vested in me by absolutely no one, I took to social media and declared the month of June to be Fidelity Month, a month where we rededicate ourselves to fidelity to God, to spouses and families, and to country and communities. And we're going to do it again this June, and we're going to do it every June going forward until we restore those values that used to unite us as Americans.
Very good. And I appreciate you doing that, Professor George. Of course, you launched it June 1st of last year. June has traditionally been, at least for the last couple of decades, traditionally known as Pride Month in the country, widely celebrated with parades and various events in institutions, the workplace. Did you get pushback from the LGBT community saying that you're trying to co-opt the month or something? What kind of criticism did you get? I can only imagine that you did.
No, I didn't really get much pushback. I didn't expect that much, and I didn't get that much. I myself am Catholic, and for Catholics, June is the month of the Sacred Heart, dedicated to the Sacred Heart. I got a little pushback from one or two of my Catholic co-religionists who said, "Wait a minute, you're stepping on Sacred Heart Month here." And my response was, "No. A month can be a month celebrating more than one great thing. So we can have Sacred Heart Month for Catholics, and Catholics can join with our Protestant brothers and with our Jewish friends and everybody to also celebrate Fidelity Month." Now, I'm not a Pride Month guy. I don't share the values of Pride Month, but the people who want to celebrate Pride Month are perfectly free. It's a free country with the First Amendment. They are free to celebrate June as Pride Month, and those of us who believe in fidelity are free to celebrate June as Fidelity Month. So let's just get on with it. I'm not concerned about trying to block somebody else. I hope they're not concerned about trying to block me. I just want to get going and moving forward with the values that we believe in and promoting those, because I do think they are so crucial to the future health of our nation. Remember, Richard, we're a democratic republic. We're a pluralistic society. We're a society that does not have common bonds in blood or soil or throne and altar. We're not like the nations of old Europe and so many of the other nations in the world where their unity is not based on ideas and beliefs and commitments, but on things like blood and soil and throne and altar, a common race, a common religion, a common cultural heritage, and so forth. We Americans, we come from everywhere. We come from East Asia. We come from Africa. We come from the Indian subcontinent. We come from Europe. We're from everywhere. We represent many different traditions of faith, ethnicities. So we need something to bind us together. And the only something that's out there that can bind us together are shared beliefs. Not totally shared. We differ in religion. We differ in politics. And that's fine. But historically, just to repeat myself, despite those religious differences and political differences, and certainly differences of race and ethnicity and so forth, we were bound together by faith in God, faith in the belief in the importance of fidelity to spouses and families, and the importance of patriotism, fidelity to country, and service to our local communities. So that's what June's all about. And if other people want to celebrate June for other purposes, it's free country, let them do it. But we share that freedom too. So we can celebrate that month for fidelity, and that's what we're doing.
Very good. I want to go back to this idea of America essentially being an idea. You mentioned that we are not a people based on blood ties. It's not land. It's not blood. It's not soil. It's not altar. It's not throne. But we're an idea. And this great idea is that, number one, there's a creator. Number two, he endows each of us with inherent value and dignity, right? We're endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. So it's that political idea with the theological truth undergirding it that binds us together in our politics, right? And it doesn't force the wisdom of the founding fathers, by the way, was that they did not create a national church, nor did they impose belief in this ideal, this political truth that bound us together as a people. They didn't impose that. They simply recognized it. And I think that's one of the part of the genius of our founding fathers.
Not only, Richard, if I can just interrupt briefly, not only did they not impose belief, whether it's political or religious, they forbade the imposition of belief. We are protected from government, federal, state, local. We are protected from our fellow citizens imposing their beliefs on us. It's a free country. That's why the people who want to celebrate Pride Month can celebrate Pride Month. That's why Catholics who want to celebrate the Sacred Heart of Jesus can celebrate the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That's why all of us who share belief in fidelity, whether we're Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, whatever we are, can celebrate fidelity.
Right. Right. Very good. I want to drill into this idea of how God is at the center and the core of these other fidelities. We're talking about fidelity in marriage, fidelity to family, fidelity to community, fidelity to country. I want to share a quote from Andrew Walker, a friend of mine. He wrote in the public discourse, he said this: "Now more than ever, we must assert that infidelity to God is what plagues Western man, and that what stands as his greatest need is fidelity and right relationship to him. Without that sure foundation provided by a divine guarantor, the value, responsibilities, and duties that attend to individuals are mere contrivances. They need to be secured to a divine ontology, not subject to the vicissitudes of human passions." Brilliant statement. I think Dr. Walker hits the nail on the head that it's our rejection of God that plagues the West more than anything. And it's finding fidelity with God in order for individuals to have a right relationship with him, but in order for us to have a right relationship in these other areas of life that are so important. So, Professor George, how do we begin to assert this idea that in order to have a healthy life and a healthy society, healthy families, we need to recommit our lives to God? Where does this begin? Where would you suggest?
Sometimes I think when people ask, do you believe in God? They're asking the wrong question. The real question is, what God do you believe in? What is your God? All of us have some things that we hold sacred, some things that we're willing to fight for and even die for. We all have a sense that there is something greater than ourselves, unless we're the ultimate idol worshipers and worship ourselves and treat ourselves as God. And while there are such idol worshipers in all times and in all places, and they may call themselves by the name of a religion, they might say, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a Hindu, or I'm Muslim, or Jewish. Nevertheless, if your real God is yourself, you're the ultimate idol worshiper. But there are lots of people who don't worship themselves, but they worship a different God, and it's not the God of the Scripture. It's not the God that is the God who creates the world in Genesis 1. It's not the divine creator and ruler of all that is. It might be an ideology that's worshipped. It might be an ethnicity that is worshipped. People elevate their ethnic identity above all else. That's the thing they're ultimately willing to fight and die for. That is very common today in what's come to be known as identitarianism. Whether it's the identitarianism of race or ethnicity or sexuality or sexual orientation or whatever it is. I think that when we get serious in the spiritual quest, we come to see that the self and ethnicity and ideology, all of these things are ultimately false gods. They are not worthy of worship. When we get serious about the spiritual quest, working our way through the options and alternatives, looking at all that's out there being presented to us as worthy of our bowing down and worshiping, at the end of the day, if we're serious, we realize that most of what's on offer here, material, wealth, status, prestige, celebrity, ideology, identity, all of these things are unsatisfying. They don't fit the bill. It's only the God of the Scripture, the God of Judeo-Christian ethical monotheism, that's the God that is worthy of worship. So that's my view. And as long as we're distracted away from the spiritual quest, we're not going to get there. As long as we allow ourselves to be distracted by selfishness, material gain, the hunt for prestige and status and recognition, or the idolatry of ideologies and identities, as long as we're distracted, we're not going to be serious about the spiritual quest. The real pivot here, I think the thing that makes all the difference is, are we serious about the spiritual quest? If we're serious about it, we'll get the right answer. It might take time in any individual case. We're going to have to work through things. We're going to have to, maybe go through some rough times because we're experimenting with things that turn out ultimately to be not very satisfying and even destructive. People have pursued the spiritual quest in ways that, has led along the way to a lot of harm. But if we're serious about it, we come to recognize that anything but God himself is just not the real thing, is not worthy of our worship, worthy of our dedication and commitment, worthy of our sacrifices. No one else can save us. No one else can redeem us. No one else can invite us into his life. Only the real, the one and only true God can do that. But I think if we can get people to get serious about the spiritual quest, they will get there.
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org.
If you're just joining us, you are tuned in to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson, founder and executive director of the Commonwealth Policy Center, here with Professor Robert George from Princeton University, and we are talking about Fidelity and Fidelity Month. Professor George, we live in an age where, to use Carl Trueman's term, an age of expressive individualism. And this expressive individualism is promoted and embraced as the highest ideal for people. The idea that we have self autonomy and ability to define our lives down to our very deepest core, including our gender. And this seems to sell. This modern attitude about self reminds me of William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus, and the closing lines say this: "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of the fate. I am of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." So why should in light of this and our current cultural moment that we're in, the current attitude about self and us with having the ability to define ourselves, why should the idea of fidelity appear to people who told there are no limits, there are no boundaries to their lives? You are the master of your fate and the captain of your soul. Why should young people in particular listen to this? And how does fidelity appeal to them?
Sure, sure. One pretty darn good reason for shifting attention and considering that maybe fidelity is the better way to go is simply the carnage that is out there for anyone and everyone to see, that comes from the cultural embracing of what Carl, following the great sociologist Robert Bellah, calls expressive individualism. Carl being the great Carl Trueman, wonderful theologian and social commentator. Robert Bellah was the late Robert Bellah, very distinguished sociologist who actually coined the phrase expressive individualism for this idea that we manufacture ourselves pretty much out of whole cloth. We through our own self-assertion, of the assertion of our autonomy, we manufacture everything about ourselves that really matters. But look at what we've got for that. Has the embracing of expressive individualism, especially with respect to sexuality, for example, has the adoption of the view of the self as imperial and of ourselves as manufacturers of ourselves, has that produced a lot of good in the world? Has it produced compassion and kindness and love and flourishing? Has it led to the well-being and fulfillment of human beings? No, quite the opposite. It's led to broken families, broken lives, selfishness, and all the harm, especially to children, that comes from that kind of selfishness. You know, the historians are fond of breaking up the epochs, Richard, into the age of this and the age of that. I'm sure you've seen this. So historians tell us that the medieval period, the Middle Ages, that's the age of faith. And what they mean by that is that in the medieval period, at least in medieval Europe, the touchstone of justice, of goodness, of right, of truth was conformity to the teachings of the faith. This was true of the great Jewish medieval thinkers, the great Islamic medieval thinkers, the great Christian medieval thinkers. Now, that's an oversimplification and something of an exaggeration. There's truth in it. The great thinkers of the Middle Ages and the people of the Middle Ages were dedicated to faith and to the idea that the touchstone of truth and of goodness and of justice and of right is conformity to the faith. But they were also great practitioners of rationality. They had a high view of reason. Look again at Maimonides, the great Jewish thinker, or Al-Farabi, the great Muslim thinker, or Thomas Aquinas, the great Christian thinker. These were men of faith, but they were also men of reason. But nevertheless, the historians are onto something. It's not just false that the medieval period was the age of faith. So what about the Enlightenment? Well, the historians call the Enlightenment the age of reason, or sometimes the age of science. Why? It's because reason was understood as the touchstone of faith and justice and truth and goodness and right. Now, again, it's an oversimplification and a bit of an exaggeration. They weren't pure rationalists. Many of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment were themselves devoutly religious people. Think, for example, of Sir Isaac Newton, but there were many, many others. But nevertheless, there's some truth in this idea of the Enlightenment as the age of reason, because reason was really given a kind of priority or pride of place, and conformity with reason really was the touchstone of goodness and truth and right, and justice. Well, okay, if the medieval period is the age of faith and the Enlightenment is the age of reason or science, what's our age? What's our epoch? What are we the age of? Well, I'm afraid what we are living in is the age of feeling. It's not true. It's not conformity to faith that's the touchstone of truth or justice or right or good. It's not conformity to reason that's the touchstone of truth and justice and right and good. It's feeling. What's true is what I feel is true, or what's true about me is how I feel. So I can have my truth and you can have your truth, and they can be in conflict because you feel differently than I feel. Now, there's a lot to be said for faith in the quest for truth. There's a lot to be said for reason. And in my view, a sound approach to truth and truth seeking is one that sees, I'm going to quote the late Pontiff Pope John Paul II here, sees faith and reason as the two wings on which the human spirit ascends to the truth. These are not opposed or even in tension with each other. They are both necessary. They're not only mutually compatible, they're mutually necessary in the pursuit of truth. You don't abandon faith for reason. You don't abandon reason in the name of faith. Faith and reason cooperate. They work together. They are the two wings on which the human spirit ascends to contemplation of truth. But feeling is unreliable. Feeling will lead you astray. Your feelings might happen to be in line with truth, but they might not either. And they're not going to get you any closer to truth. Is going with your feelings is much more likely to lead you astray. I'll here go back to the great pre-Christian pagan philosopher Plato, who gave us a profound truth when he said that in the properly ordered soul, in the well-ordered soul, yes, there was an affective or emotive part. There's the appetitive part of the soul, but we go astray when we let the appetitive part have priority and control, when we just act on our feelings, emotions, desires, wants, passions. That in the well-ordered soul, reason is in control of passion. Reason is the governor. So we orient passion or feeling or emotion in a direction that is in line with reason in its pursuit of the human good. Feeling itself can't tell you what's good. It can only tell you what you want, whatever you happen to want, which may be good and may be bad. Your wants might be the wants of Mother Teresa, or they might be the wants of Adolf Hitler. But reason, while it's fallible, can nevertheless help us critically to evaluate what our feelings, our desires, our passions are prompting us or motivating us to do. And we need to make sure that reason is in the driver's seat there. We would say, as believers, reason in cooperation with faith, reason informed by faith, needs to exercise control over desire. Our desires shouldn't be treated as good just because they are our desires. We need a critical perspective on them. We may, in the light of faith and reason, judge that desire to be a bad desire, in which case we have to change it. And we can, because we human beings are free creatures made in the image and likeness of God. Now, being made in the image and likeness of God doesn't mean that God has 5 fingers on each hand and hair on his head and a nose. God is free and rational. God has agency, and so do we. God has given us that gift, that God-like quality of agency, being free and rational. And using our reason, informed by faith, we can, with God's grace, come to exercise control over our passions and desires and not be mere slaves to them. So when we understand, in the light of faith and reason, that our feelings are leading us astray, we can resist those feelings. We can reform those feelings. We can understand that we need to change. We need to get better. We need to do better. We need to get in line with the good as faith and reason reveal the good to us.
Very good. Christianity is a perfectly reasonable faith. It is rooted and recorded in history. It corresponds to reality. It explains where we get the moral law from, and not just that, but the highest ideal of what it means to be a person, what it means to flourish. It tells us who we are. As you mentioned, we're made in the image of God, and we were created to walk with God. Christianity has the best story that corresponds with not just reality, but I think there's something we have a conscience, and we know the truth. Romans chapter 1 tells us that we all know the truth, that there is a God and there is a moral law, and we do have a higher purpose. So,
Yeah, Romans. Can I just add to your point there that St. Paul in the letter to the Romans tells us something else closely related to the point you just made, and that is that in addition to the revealed law, the law of Moses, in addition to, for example, the Ten Commandments and the Noahide laws and the various commands that God has, there is a law written on our hearts, a law written on the hearts even of the Gentiles, that is, the people from Paul's Jewish point of view, who don't have the law of Moses. And that law is sufficient for people to be held accountable and even be held under judgment by God himself for their activities. It enables them to know some fundamental truths about the human good, about virtue, about justice, about morality, even if they don't have the revealed law. So I think it's important to understand that there is, in addition to the divine law, there is what philosophers call a natural law, the law written on the heart, a law accessible to reason, even if unaided by special revelation, the revelation in the scripture.
mhm. Very good. It has been said, and I've heard it said, that today, in our post-truth age, of course, emotions are elevated above reason. Just listen to your heart, follow your emotions, seek that thing that will truly fulfill you, whatever that might be. But it has been said, Professor George, that today in the West, we think with our hearts and we feel with our minds. And again, this speaks to the idea that emotion has been elevated above reason. That both are good and both are who we are, how God made us. He gives us emotion and he gives us minds to think. But when you elevate emotion above reason and above objective truth, and that's where we are today, right? We have these objective realities that there is such a thing, for example, as male and female. And there's a strong push today in this country and in the West to say, no, that was your sex assigned at birth, whatever that means, or that you have the ability and the freedom to change your gender, to transcend your gender, which is utterly ridiculous. It is contrary to reality, contrary to science and biology, and that we're told that we're supposed to believe this. And if I could add to this, without trying to rant, but we have major respectable medical organizations that are endorsing this idea of transgender care for youth, who instead of offering them mental help, psychological guidance, they're all in on issuing high-level hormones and surgical procedures to still developing children and youth, and saying that this is the right thing to do. So perhaps I'm sharing this just as an example that illustrates the idea that emotion has trumped reason, and it has real effects. So I want to tie this back into what we were talking about earlier, that when I challenged this self-expressive culture, the expressive individualism that is elevated as the highest good, you responded that there's plenty of evidence that that's not working out well. I want to share a few more of these, few more statistics that speak to this. Here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, last year, about 2,000 Kentuckians died of drug overdoses. Drug addiction is one of the great public health crises of the day. Mental health of college students, for those entering their freshman year into the university, is incredibly high mental health issues. One university professor shared a couple years ago that about half of the incoming freshman class had mental health issues. Loneliness is considered a public health crisis. And then suicide. According to the National Institute for Mental Health, suicide was the second leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 10 to 14 and 25 to 34. Those are 2020 statistics. So these are just a few categories that speak of hopelessness, pain, meaningless of life. So this self-expressive age that we're in, telling people to do whatever you want, disregard the moral boundaries. You have no obligation to society or your family. Do what you feel is right. We're seeing how this has worked out statistically.
That's what I call the carnage. That's what I'm pointing to. The carnage that you find in the wake of the age of feeling, this age of subjectivity, of self-expression, expressive individualism. You know, Richard, it's sometimes said, and I think with truth in it, that there are no new bad ideas. There are only recycled old bad ideas. And there's a very bad idea that's being recycled today, and it's at the heart of the kinds of issues that you just put on the table for our discussion. There's an old heresy called Gnosticism. It arose early in the Christian era. In the 2nd century, we have St. Irenaeus writing against the heretics, and the particular heretics that he has mainly in mind are called the Gnostics, Gnostic, Gnostics. And Gnosticism is known today mainly as the idea that there's a group of people who have secret religious knowledge. That's what we think of usually when we think of the old Gnostic heresy. But there was another dimension of Gnosticism, very important, common to all forms of Gnosticism, and there were various forms of Gnosticism, but this was common to all of them. And it's an idea that we're seeing back again today, one that was thoroughly repudiated by Christianity, but here it is back again. And here's the idea. The idea is that what a human person is a spirit or psyche or soul that is trapped in or imprisoned in or resides in a material body. So there's a separation. Gnosticism, in all of its forms, considers the person as separate from the body, and the real person is the conscious and desiring aspect of the self. The body's just the material vehicle of the person. Now, historically, different Gnostic sects did different things with that basic anthropology. By anthropology, I mean understanding of the human person, this dualistic understanding of the human person as two different, as the person, as the actual person being the soul or the psyche or the spirit, and the body being just the material vehicle of the person. Some Gnostic sects took this to mean that the body was very bad and we should just, to the extent possible, separate ourselves from it and lead a highly ascetical existence. Others took an opposite approach and said, since the body doesn't matter all that much, our bodily activities we can enjoy with abandon and even lead debauched sexual lives, because what we do with our material bodies doesn't really matter, because the real self isn't the material body. The real self is the mind or spirit or psyche that resides in the body. Well, as I say, Christianity repudiated that. The Christian concept of the soul is that the soul is the substantial form of the body. The body is as much part of the personal reality of the human being as the soul is. And this accounts for why Christians went to the mat for the doctrine of the resurrection of the body. If all that really mattered, if the real person were simply the psyche or the soul or the spirit, then Christianity would have been satisfied to teach, well, the material body rots away in the grave after death, and the soul lives on, goes to heaven, or perhaps goes to hell, but the soul lives on, but in an immaterial existence like an angel. That's not what Christianity held. Christianity went to the mat for the resurrection of the body, that for the person to be fully and truly healed as a person, the person has to exist in bodily form. So we get the resurrection of the body, the idea of a glorified body, that we don't live in eternity just as disembodied or unembodied souls, because the body really does matter. It's part of our personal reality. And so what we do with the body really matters. Well, look at how this idea that Christianity repudiated and went to the mat to repudiate, the idea that the real self is the psyche that just resides in a body, has come back to underwrite transgender ideology today. So your real you, your real self isn't the material body, according to this ideology, this neo-Gnostic dualism. The real self is your gender identity, this set of feelings sitting in there, the conscious and desiring self. And the body may or may not be in line with that. So you might have a female psyche inhabiting a male body. So what do you do, since the real person is the psyche, and so therefore the real person is female? You alter the body, the male body, to try to feminize it. Or if it's a male psyche residing in a female body, you again alter the body in order to bring it into line with what's the norm for the male psyche. But this is just a fundamental mistake. It's philosophically untenable. Christianity was right to reject it. We are not souls or psyches inhabiting bodies. We're not just, the conscious and intentional or conscious and desiring aspect of the self. We're the body-soul composites. We're unified creatures, and the body is as much me as my psyche is. So I am male or female depending not on some set of feelings internal to me. I am male or female depending on my bodily organization with respect to reproductive function. So, if you're organized, your body is organized to produce the male gamete, sperm, you are a male. If you are biologically organized to produce the female gamete, you are female. Now, there are abnormalities of sexual development. We know all about these. They don't change the fundamental fact that you are fundamentally organized either for the male role or the female role in reproduction. And it's that organization, that biological organization with respect to reproduction, that makes you either male or female. There's not some gender identity that's the real you residing as a set of feelings somewhere deep inside, as a kind of immaterial substance residing somehow in a material body.
Very good. If I could just add to that, it's been said before that gender transition, so-called gender transition, denies the reality that male and female are both good, and God has defined and made us male and female. It is an attack on the image of God in women who are experiencing gender dysphoria and told that they should make their outward appearance to be more like male. And vice versa. Same with male. They're told that if they really, really believe that they're female, then that they should pursue that outward transition. But at the core, down to their gene level, you really cannot change who you are, your genetic reality, your internal, the biological reality, the hormonal reality. We can alter some things here and there, but we really cannot alter us to our core. And this is, again, how God makes us. He defines us. And it's good. Maleness and femaleness in and of themselves are good, aren't they? It's part of being made in the image of God.
This is a very good example of the way that faith doesn't contradict reason. It reinforces and further illuminates the truths that are available to reason. Even if we didn't have faith, if we were solid reasoners, if we were doing good reasoning, we would realize that Gnostic dualism is false. It's philosophically untenable. We would realize that. So we would realize that you're not a male or female depending on internal feeling. You're a male or female as a matter of biological reality. You can understand that even by just straightforward rational deliberation and investigation and judgment. But faith now reinforces that, and it further illuminates that in the way that you just presented it. So now, in light of God and understanding God's plan for humanity and the goodness of male and the goodness of female and the complementary role in male and female, we have a richer understanding than reason itself can provide, but it's not one that contradicts reason. It enriches and expands our understanding and further illuminates. But it's only in an age of feeling that you can lay both faith and reason aside and imagine, and it's just a matter of imagination, it's a falsehood, and imagine that you are male or female depending on whether you have a male or female psyche, that it's a matter of how you feel and not a matter of biological reality. So the transgender ideology and more generally gender ideology that you're talking about now is itself something that can only arise in an age of feeling. It only arises because we've elevated feeling to the point where we've made it the touchstone of truth. And it just can't perform that role, Richard. Feeling isn't up to the task.
Yeah, I agree. And the statistics bear this out. Professor George, the historian, I'm going to take us in a little different direction here, a bigger view, broad picture view. The Roman historian Savinius observed the greatness of Rome at its zenith, its wealth, and its splendor. And he said this, that the Roman Empire is luxurious, but it is in misery. It is dying, but it laughs. Even while Rome fell, the Christian church emerged out of the ruins of Roman culture. Their self-centered ethics were supplanted by a Christian ethos of fidelity to God, fidelity to marriage, fidelity to monogamy within marriage, their love of neighbor, and care for the least among us. This new ethos arose out of the ruins of this self-centered cultural ethos that Rome embraced, and it just led to their demise. While we see the moral and cultural ruins around us today, the statistics again bear this out. Where do you suggest that the average person begin to implement fidelity? Do they look to their own lives, their own families, their communities? Where do they begin as they look at the ruins around them? Peoples whose lives have been damaged, institutions that are teetering. And as I say this, I'm speaking to the person who is fearful. I don't want to get out there. I don't want to go against the grain. I might be criticized, or I might be labeled in one way or another. It might hurt my job prospects. It might hurt my standing in my neighborhood. Where does the average person begin? Who cares about reinstituting fidelity into our society? What recommendations do you have?
All right. First, it's a matter of rededicating ourselves to fidelity to God and to spouses and families and to country and community. All right. How do we do that? It's not just a psychological move. We do have to think, right? We have to say to ourselves, we have to resolve, you know what? I'm going to be a more faithful Christian or a more faithful Jew or a more faithful Muslim. And this is not sectarian. Fidelity Month is not just for Christians. It's for everybody who recognizes the importance of fidelity. So no matter who you are, rededicate yourself to God. Be a better Christian than you're being right now. If you haven't been, if you haven't been praying regularly, start praying. Again, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, if you haven't been praying regularly to God, start praying. Start praying more regularly. If you haven't been attending church or synagogue or mosque, show up. If you're not active in the affairs of your religious community, your local parish church, or the community church you belong to, or your synagogue, start playing a role there. So that's how we rededicate ourselves as a practical matter, not just resolution, going beyond resolution. It's a practical matter, rededicating ourselves to God. Now, what about family, spouses? Well, you might be a faithful husband in the sense that you're not having affairs, but now let's ask ourselves, am I being a great husband, or am I being a great wife? Am I really serving my spouse? Not just technically being faithful, not having affairs, but am I serving, or am I wanting too much to be served? Is my focus on getting her to do stuff for me and take care of my needs and desires and wants? I should be looking out more for her. I should be serving her. My vocation as a husband, like all vocations, a vocation is a call to service. My vocation as a husband is to serve my wife. Her vocation is to serve me, but she is the one who should worry about that. I should worry less about, is she serving me and fulfilling her vocation as a wife? I should be worried about, am I serving her as well as I can be? And that's my vocation as a husband. Now, what about children? Same thing. Now, serving your children means being there for the kids. It's not just arranging for them to be at Little League. It's being at the games when you can be. Now, we all, we have jobs and other responsibilities, and we have other kids, and, you can't be at every Little League game. But be there when you can. Do not let those devices and cell phones and smartphones babysit your kids. Don't let those devices substitute for your being there for your kids. In fact, let's maybe limit or do away with the devices, especially for young children, and make sure that we're parenting and not shuffling off the parenting role to the devices. Now, what about patriotism and community? How can I be a better citizen? Am I voting? Or when election day comes, do I just not make it? Or I'm busy with other things? How about being involved in civic affairs? Am I working for campaigns for candidates that I really believe in, that I think would do a good job for our nation and for our community? Am I contributing some money? I might not have a lot to contribute, but am I making at least some contribution to trying to improve our civic life? Same for the community. There are things in the community that I can be involved in. Am I doing my part there? Am I playing my role? So when I mean rededicating ourselves, Richard, to God and to family, spouses and families and to communities, I mean not just the resolution, but the practical doing of things that are the substance of the fidelity that I'm asking for.
That's good. Very good. As we wind down the program, Professor George, do you have any big plans? There are two questions. Do you have any big plans for Fidelity Month this June 2024? And then secondly, how can our listeners commemorate Fidelity Month?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about those things. I realize I failed to answer an earlier question that you raised. I got distracted off on part of on a different question, and you asked me about people worrying that if they are, too public about their fidelity to God, if they're too public about their beliefs about marriage and family, if they're too public about their patriotism, they'll be looked down on or maybe even suffer personal or professional consequences in this woke age when people are castigated for having politically incorrect beliefs. What I want to say to that is, especially to those who are Christians as we are, but I hope it'll also have resonances to people of other faiths, but certainly to Christians. Our predecessors, our forebears, were subjected to a lot worse than being called a name on social media or even losing a job. Their fidelity cost them their lives, and they were willing to do that, lovingly, freely, willing to do that in imitation of Jesus, who gives his life for all of us. The great martyrs or the great heroes of Christianity, they were willing to suffer for fidelity to God and to family and to community. Why was John the Baptist murdered by Herod Antipas? It's because he insisted on bearing testimony to the truth about marriage. He called out the king's illicit marriage, and he wouldn't stay quiet about it. People today would say to John the Baptist, hey, that's a private matter. That's their business. What are you doing talking about? You got what you deserved. But we Christians, we need to recognize that John the Baptist is the model for us. Jesus himself said, there is no greater man born of woman than John. What made him great? It was his fidelity. The fidelity that he lived for and was willing to die for. So we're called to imitate John and to imitate Jesus himself and our willingness, if necessary, to suffer and even die for our faith, for fidelity to God and to the godly values that we hold dear, rightly hold dear. But none of us is going to lose his life over this. Most of us won't even suffer professional consequences. We just need to muster the courage to be willing to be different, to be willing to stand out, to be willing to be called a name, to be willing to have somebody dislike us. We need to do it lovingly, not with anger or not with vitriol. We need to do it lovingly, but we need to do it. I'll tell you what I've learned in my years of trying to give public witness to the values that you and I are talking about, Richard, the fidelity to God, fidelity to family. What I've learned is there's good news and bad news. The good news is courage is contagious. When people see courage being manifested by someone, they admire that and they want to be like that. And that encourages them to exemplify some courage themselves. That's the good news. The bad news is that cowardice is also contagious. When people see people behaving in a cowardly manner, not standing up, cowering in the corner, refusing to speak up when they should be speaking up, people see that. That makes them afraid too. It undermines their resolution to exercise some courage. So we need to be the ones who are willing to step out and perform acts, even at some risk to ourselves, for the sake of courage, for the sake of fidelity.
Very good. Dr. George, this has been a real pleasure talking with you on the Commonwealth Matters. I want to thank you for joining us and what you're doing to promote the idea of fidelity in our culture. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in. And if you could take a moment and go to your favorite podcast platform, please rate us. That really helps. And also, please tell your friends about the Commonwealth Matters. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and may God bless you. If you've enjoyed this program and would like to hear the full length, then please go to your favorite podcast platform and sign up for the Commonwealth Matters. While you're there, please rate us. This is really helpful. Also, tell your friends about us. We believe that the Commonwealth Matters is an important resource of good ideas, policies, and perspectives that will help shape Kentucky to become the best version of itself. Thank you.